In episode 153 of the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we meet with Dr. David Klemanski and Joshua Curtis to discuss their book, Don't Let Your Anxiety Run Your Life, Using the Science of Emotion Regulation and Mindfulness to Overcome Fear and Worry. You can find the show notes for this episode at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/153. Have you decided you're ready to make a change? To reclaim your health and fitness? The 40 Plus Fitness Podcast is here for you. I'm your host, Alan Meisner. I'm an NSAM certified personal trainer with a specialization in corrective exercise and fitness nutrition. Let me be your coach as you find your way on your health and fitness journey. All right, let's go. David Klemanski is a psychologist and professor at Yale University, where he directs the Yale Center for Anxiety and Mood Disorders and the Yale Anxiety and Emotion Lab. He specializes in the classification and treatment of anxiety and mood disorders, and his research is focused on mindfulness and emotion regulation in anxiety and depression. Joshua Curtis is a doctoral researcher at Boston University and conducts psychology research at Yale University as a statistician. His interests include the use of innovative statistical modeling to address issues pertaining to the nosology of emotional disorders. Specifically, his research delineates emotional regulation deficits underlying anxiety disorders. So Josh and David, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. The wonderful opportunity to share a little bit more about our book.
Yes, thank you.
This book, it really could not have come at a better time in my life. My wife was telling me, she says, you're an asshole. I mean, she didn't say the word asshole, and she said something nicer. But it was, literally the job, trying to open up my new business and try to get everything going. There's some anxiety in my life. There's some struggles. And so that was manifesting in my behavior. And I really appreciate my wife for being able to, say that to me, because a lot of folks wouldn't say that to someone they love. They basically want that compassion and want me to feel good. And no, I needed to hear that. And then so when I knew that I was going to get an opportunity to get your book and interview you, I was like, okay, this is God speaking or something that's saying, okay, this is the right book at the right time. And quite frankly, it is. It's an awesome read, but it was also something that I could make actionable in my life. And I just really appreciate that you wrote this book. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, you're welcome. And thank you for sharing that. I think, it's been interesting as we've sort of been sharing our book with other people. I've heard that similar sort of, story, if you will, like, that this came at the right time. There's someone in my family who's anxious. And I think it speaks to the topic itself rather than just the book. Everyone's anxious at some point in time in their life. And I think that, we all experience it sometimes to differing degrees, but it can get pretty bad for people at different times. And that's what we hope for the book, that it can help them throughout those different moments when they are anxious. So I'm glad it worked for you and hopefully will work for many others as well.
I'm sure it will. Absolutely. So I want to start, and I'm literally on the first page of your book, and this quote hits me, and I'm like, okay, this is the right book at the right time. And it says, almost everything in life has the potential to make us feel anxious, but only if you let it. In other words, it is entirely possible to skillfully manage your anxiety by examining your relationships you have to your fears, worries, and embracing them rather than avoiding them.
Absolutely.
And that was so poignant. I mean, that was literally just one of those things, you're reading it. It's like, okay, I'm going to read that again and again and again. Because if you just take that away from this single conversation we're having, that's gold.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I think that phrase, even for me in terms of when I teach about anxiety or when I talk to people about anxiety, our patients that we work with and those kinds of things, I think that's exactly the crux of it. It's the relationship that we have with that anxiety. And we need to change that relationship to make it more adaptive for us rather than letting the anxiety control, who we are, how we act, how we feel, those kinds of things. So I'm glad you picked that out because that is the crux of what we're talking about here.
And so as we talk about anxiety, and I do want to give Josh an opportunity to talk. so Josh, I'm going to ask you to go in and define anxiety? What is anxiety, and what is it?
Yeah, no, that's a fair question to ask. Because again, meaning, sometimes different things to different people. If you ask a non-psychologist sort of what anxiety is, they might say something such as, it's a negative mood state, or when I'm anxious, I feel nervous or keyed up or on edge or something like that. And that's all true for sure. Often when psychologists think about anxiety, they think about a few extra things as well. One, often anxiety is something that is future oriented. So when people feel anxious, people will often worry about future events, something impending that could happen, often things that are uncertain, trying to resolve, uncertainties and make sure everything's tied up in their life the right way. So this is a sort of a future-oriented process that's geared towards resolving uncertainty for a lot of people. And another aspect about anxiety is that when people experience it, it's not just the thoughts you have or not even just the emotions you have, but it's also certain behaviors you perform too. So often when people are anxious or fearful about something, there's a strong tendency to avoid whatever that threat might be, whether it be, real in your world around you or, something that's more abstract and, future-oriented. So that's a lot of what could end up amounting to overall.
Okay. So, David, from a psychological perspective, there's three, I guess, basically diagnosable conditions.
Sure.
That we would look at with regards to anxiety.
Yes. I mean, there's probably a few more than three, but there's a three sort of core group of conditions, of diagnosable conditions that we certainly do look at and try and figure out, if that's what a person's experiencing so that we can help sort of tailor their treatment to help them reduce their anxiety and sort of overcome it.
Okay. Do you mind defining those three?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, some of the three major ones that we really covered in our book there's one called generalized anxiety disorder, and that is really characterized by a lot of worry and sort of excessive anxiety or worry for months that people experience, a plethora of symptoms that might include feeling restless or keyed up or on edge, maybe feeling tired from sort of all the worries that they have, problems concentrating, muscle tension, those kinds of things. And this is really about people who worry excessively about sort of things that are sort of beyond everyday ordinary worries. So like they worry maybe that something bad is going to happen to their family constantly, or that the stock market's going to crash and they're going to lose all their finances. So they're realistic in a sense, but they sort of go beyond what we should be worrying about every day of the week. Another really common anxiety disorder is panic disorder. And so people with panic disorder tend to have recurrent unexpected panic attacks, which is a really serious physical symptom that people feel. Lots of physical symptoms, again, sort of people describe it as, oh, I thought I was having a heart attack or something like that. And so panic attacks can sort of mimic some of the worst physical symptoms that we can experience. And they come out of the blue for someone with a true panic disorder. So they're not doing anything necessarily that makes them anxious. They could be, and they could have a panic attack. But to have true panic disorder, it's really something that comes out of the blue. They weren't expecting it. They didn't sort of feel it coming on, but it just hits them pretty instantly and gets to a really rapid peak within 10 minutes. And then another sort of very common anxiety disorder that we talk about in the book quite a bit is social anxiety disorder. And that's really people who experience sort of anxiety about social interactions, sort of the fear of being judged or criticized or critiqued by other people. And as a result, they tend to avoid quite a bit in their life. And they tend to avoid social interactions, going to parties, mingling with coworkers, maybe even family, those kinds of things. So those are probably the three common anxiety disorders that we sort of at least reference in our book and that we would see quite a bit of in our clinical practice.
And I really appreciate that you took the time to kind of caution folks about it's very hard for you to be objective in kind of diagnosing yourself.
Yes.
And so this is kind of one of those things when you realize that you're in a situation that this is happening, it's worth considering professional help if you really feel like it's preventing you from doing the things in your life that are really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Josh, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was just going to quickly add, I think that when people experience anxiety, and you really want to think about, does it reach the clinical level? Anxiety can be bad no matter how bad, how much you experience it. But when is it really clinically diagnosable is when it interferes with your life. Like you were just saying, your functioning is compromised by the anxiety, and really sort of how it really sort of causes you to stress in your life. You were talking about irritability and how your wife pointed that out earlier, and sort of your anxiety could have been causing you to stress even if temporarily, but we're looking for people who experience the stress quite often, quite a bit as a result of their anxiety.
Yeah. I mean, and I think my deal with anxiety is that it's an event driven thing. So it's not a clinical thing. It's just I have to realize when I'm in that situation, which again, your book is really good about kind of giving me the tools to consider how I'm letting those events affect my life. So you didn't mention one. There's one of the behavioral ones where people are in avoidance. And I want to go through this. And I didn't tell you guys exactly what I wanted to talk about here, but I did want to tell you that, avoidance obviously is critical, particularly in my field. is that a lot of people are really afraid to go to the gym.
Okay.
Because they're not fit. And they're concerned that all the fit people at the gym are going to judge them. And, again, I can tell them as a trainer that's not happening. I could literally walk every fit person up to them and say, no, I'm actually not paying any attention to you at all. But again, it's not completely rational, but it really is something that's very, very difficult for an individual that, wants to change their life to just make that commitment and get in there and actually do something. Because again, they just believe that the people in the gym are judging them. So I want you to walk us through a process with someone like this, how you would have them manage that anxiety.
Definitely. Josh, do you want to take it or do you want me to go for it?
Sure. I'll take a few things and then you can,
sure.
You can certainly add some more for sure. So often, with someone has anxiety, say, if they're going to the gym or something like that because they're afraid of what other people might think about them. One thing that I bet they're invariably doing is that they're, certainly avoiding the gym, as you mentioned. And one of the things about avoidance itself is that it creates this vicious cycle. You're sort of preventing yourself from being in the environment where you can receive new evidence about how bad it actually is or about how threatening or scary it actually is. So rather than avoiding these sorts of situations, one of the aspects of what we talk about in our book and is practiced, across in a lot of clinics is having people approach these sorts of situations, exposing them to these sorts of situations in a particular way. So if there was this sort of individual who was scared of going to the gym, we'd have this person not only just go to the gym, but also avoid a lot of the individual safety behaviors they might do in the moment. So if you're someone who's scared to go into the gym because you're afraid of how they might judge you, you might say, walk in and not look at anyone in the eye, avoid eye contact completely, isolate yourself in the corner of the room to a place that's unoccupied by other people, things like that. We'd sort of tell people to do sort of the healthy opposite of that, have them go to a more populated area, perhaps look other people in the eye, be more present focused on the present awareness rather than, worrying about what other people might think or having your mind drift elsewhere and, ponder other sorts of things. So those are some of the strategies we'd initially start with helping someone in this sort of situation. Yeah.
So from an exposure perspective, I guess one of the core things I'd say is, okay, a lot of folks are kind of afraid to approach the free weight area because that tends to be where the more, I don't mean this in a bad way, but more the hardcore lifter is going to be hanging out. And so they kind of see that and say that, well, that's, I don't want to walk over next to those big guys that are lifting all the weights. But the reality is that going over to that area is going to give them some great fitness benefits. So taking the time to walk over there and engage in the moment of saying, okay, I may not know what I'm supposed to do, but if I know what body part I want to work and I ask one of those guys, okay, I want to work my biceps, am I doing the curls right? Just that moment of engagement, which again is extreme challenge, but just kind of, like you said, accepting it and getting into it and saying, okay, I'm going to have this person actually coach me a little bit by telling me, because they will. I can tell anyone that would hear me, is that when you go into the gym, everyone there is focused on themselves. It's just invariably what happens in a gym. But if someone asks for help or someone needs help, almost everyone in the gym will step forward and do what they can. So this is an opportunity for them to engage in the moment and kind of say, okay, I'm going to expose myself to this, and I'm going to be a part of the community that is the gym. And that's an area where it's a stretch goal, but at the point that they do that, they're effectively dismissing or removing the anxiety that exists around that moment.
Absolutely. And I think that you're sort of touching on the point that, to circle back to what we talked about in the beginning, is that your anxiety, that person's anxiety when they're approaching the weight section or even just the gym in and of itself, it's not really about the gym. They might feel it is. They might feel that's a source of their anxiety. And to an extent, that's true, but it's actually about the relationship that they have to the gym, the thoughts that they have. And so in addition to what Josh was saying, sort of slowly approach things, do things mindfully, sort of gradually expose yourself to the things that make you anxious in a really skillful way, we also want that person to start to think about how they think about the gym and sort of why they think those judgments might pop up and sort of how they can change their relationship to that experience. That's going to be as valuable as the exposure itself. And so if you can do those in combination, I think you're going to really see someone make some headway in sort of meeting their goal. Because avoidance is all about actually blocking the goal in the first place. And I think that we can help reduce the anxiety so that they can actually get to the desired result that they want.
Now, one of the things I do every morning, and I found it very helpful, is to take some time in the morning and kind of write down in my journal some things I'm grateful for. And I really think that that's kind of one of those practices that's very similar to what you guys are talking about here, is that, this is an opportunity for me to kind of be grateful for times that I kind of push myself, and I literally, make sure that, okay, if there's something that's making me anxious and I beat it, this is an opportunity for me to kind of acknowledge that I've succeeded and that those successes over time build on each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes, true.
Okay. So again, if someone's struggling to be beyond the things you guys have already kind of talked about and they want to get in there and start doing these things, are there any other tips or things that you would say they would want to practice as they get into this?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. And I think, our book, it's really centered around 9 sort of tips that people can use to practice their anxiety. So I would say, some of the ones that we have in our book are really to sort of first pay attention to your anxiety, notice when the anxiety is coming about and what it's, what you're doing as a result of the anxiety. Do you avoid because you're anxious about the gym? Do you avoid certain areas of the gym because you're afraid of being judged or critiqued, those kinds of things? So paying attention to it and understanding how it comes about and sort of how often and in what context and those kinds of things. The more that you can sort of pay attention to your emotion rather than try to suppress it or get away from it, which a lot of people tend to do, but the more that you can pay attention to it, the better off they're going to be in sort of managing that anxiety. Just one other quick point that I want to make is sort of thinking about how to flexibly respond to your emotions. And that's sort of another theme in our book. And that's a really fancy way of saying, we have emotional experiences and sometimes we tend to be pretty rigid about how we sort of respond to that. So if I'm pretty anxious in the gym and I'm going to the weight section where I see all these, great looking muscle guys and sort of that's my goal, but I don't feel like, I feel like I'm really far from that. Your rigid response might be to avoid and sort of just not do it at all, or even think about how, bad you feel about yourself or all these negative critiques. And instead of sort of taking that rigid approach that people tend to do, they've adopted these habits over a lifetime, try to slowly chip away at them and actually sort of do something different, behave differently, think differently, feel differently, those kinds of things. So learning to really flexibly respond to your emotions, which really means changing the way that you behave very subtly, can really be a helpful process.
Yeah, I'd agree. And one other thing I'd add to that really briefly is, when you're trying to sort of manage anxiety or outsmart anxiety, sometimes anxiety has been with you for quite a while. And so when you're in the process of, trying to implement some of these techniques such as, mindfulness or exposure or some of these things we've been talking about, these skills, it's important to do it in a way that's forgiving toward yourself as well. You might not always be successful upon, first attempt or, often these skills are cumulative. They build over time and you continue to practice it and exercise it as if it's a muscle. And so it's important to go into it with that mindset that, approach it with a forgiving perspective in case of, to make sure you get the most out of it without being too critical on yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a great point.
And I really appreciate this, guys. I mean, this has been an awesome conversation because, one of the funny things is that, anxiety effectively boosts our cortisol. It's a stress hormone, and cortisol is catabolic, which effectively reduces muscle mass and helps you gain body fat. So the more you're able to manage your anxiety, manage your stress, the better off you're overall going to be. So the recognizing, the engaging, the actually just confronting who you are and how you feel, and using that and using the fact that you have a brain and the capacity to decide how you're going to accept the stimulus, how you're going to accept what's going on in your life. I think that's a great message. And again, this book gives us a lot of tools for managing our anxiety, and it's don't let your anxiety run your life. And again, when my wife has to tell me that my behavior is is not what she wants it to be, it was effectively running my life. And so I appreciate her for being willing to bring this to my attention. And then I do appreciate both of you for giving me the tools to work with it. So again, thank you for this book and thank you for coming on the show. If someone wanted to get in touch with you, get the book, anything else, where would you have me send them?
Absolutely. Well, first, thank you as well for the opportunity to sort of talk about our book. We poured a lot of time last year into writing this, and we're glad the message is at least well received with you and a couple other people that we've talked with, and we think it can be helpful. So, we want to sell as many copies, not to make money, but also just to sort of pass on some of the research that we've been doing. So we really appreciate this opportunity and hope that your audience finds it helpful, especially if they were to look at the tips in the book. As far as getting the book, it's easily searchable on Amazon. So you've given them the title, but they can certainly find a copy on Amazon, whether they prefer to read it on their Kindle or their iPad or a hard copy. It's also available at the publisher's website, which is New Harbinger Publishing, and they're selling our book there. One of the things, if I can just sort of plug it really quickly, is that one thing that's unique about our book is we offer an online companion website. So it has more forms that people can use that sort of, go along with the book for tracking anxiety, logging how you feel, those kinds of things. And also some mindfulness exercises that are recorded, some new ones that aren't included in the book, but also some that are included in the book so that people can listen to them, while they're out and about on their iPod or something like that. So hopefully they'll find that helpful. But those will be the two great places to sort of search for the book.
Awesome. And so this is going to be episode 153. And so you can find the show notes, and I'll have all the links to all of this on the show notes at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/153. So again, David and Josh, I really do appreciate your time today. It's been awesome having this conversation with you. And like I said, I really appreciate the book and the tools that it gave me to manage my own anxiety.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us.
If you enjoyed today's episode, would you please share it with someone? I'd really appreciate it. Thank you. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, I discuss supplements. 5 supplements you should consider taking. Until then, have a happy and healthy day.